assuming that the fire department has sent accurate reports.
Doing a run report, the city clerk wasn't there, the administration wasn't there. It was the EMT or the paramedic that was there, filled out the run report, and then it gets sent to us. Some of them don't have the resources to fax it out of there, or scan it and email it, or to put electronic data and submit it to us. So, you know, you got some smaller services and you got some larger services. So I was gonna say the larger services, I don't know of too many administrative people in the city that actually touch it and say, you know, because they're not EMTs, they're not billers. So, and if they're, and I have seen it in some situations where the people in the city did the coding and sent it off, and I found so many mistakes, so they decided that that's not a wise place to go. And they're just honest mistakes because they haven't learned, they don't have the resources.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Fry?
The one department that you mentioned that did their own coding, that wasn't Clinton, that was another department.
That was another department, yes.
Thanks, that's all.
No. Commissioner? you have anything? That's all we have. Mr. Supel? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Jeffrey Horn.
And what is your occupation?
I'm the city administrator for the city of Clinton.
How long have you been the city administrator?
13 months.
What did you do prior to coming here?
I was the city administrator in Mitchellville,
How long were you there?
3 years.
When did you become aware that we had an issue in the city with ambulance billing?
I knew about the case not too long after I started, but I didn't know. The city attorney left just over a month after I started, and we had only had very cursory discussions about it, nothing in depth, only that it was going on.
At some point, you became more involved and more aware of this
That's right,
action?
earlier this year.
And how did that come about?
Dave Pillars was the acting city attorney at the time, and Mike Walker had gotten all the materials that had been requested of him at that time, sent through and gone over that, at which point he came back to discuss that with myself and with the council.
And what was your role in this litigation?
I participated, I was in the meetings with the council when we discussed the ongoing issue, and then also I represented the city at the hearing.
What did you do in response to the lawsuit, you personally?
At the time, we couldn't go into it in great detail because a lot of our discussions were in closed session. So what I did first was instruct the fire chief in his evaluation to go forward and get trained to make sure the coding was done correct. That was the first thing, and that was in April.
Whose responsibility is it in the city of Clinton to make sure that the coding is accurate?
The fire department's responsibility.
Sarah Nolan is not responsible for that?
Sarah Nolan is a clerk, is a processor. She merely works with the software to make sure the bills get out and we get collections. We don't ask her to do anything more than that.
You've never trained her to make sure that she knew how to do, read a narrative report and enter code? it's a certified coder or anything like that.
No, we didn't.
That's always been since before you got here, and currently that's the fire department's responsibility.
That was the way it was when I got here. That's correct.
And the EMS director
Yeah.
is the individual that is tasked with that.
That was my understanding, yes.
And in practice, that's the way it worked, correct?
That's correct.
Following as you got into this, at some point, the case settled. And then what was your next task?
Well, you know, as part of the settlement, once the settlement was over, the city, we discussed about how we were gonna respond, and that we felt that the judgment was large enough that we had to have some action and some consequence to what happened.
Okay. And ultimately, it's your responsibility to make those determinations?
You know, I think we made it as a consultative decision, but ultimately, I'm the chain of command, I'm the next one up above the fire chief.
And when you say we,
You know, we talked about it.
who's we?
Without getting into it in great detail, you know, we had discussions with the council about the personnel involved.
Ultimately, you made a decision to terminate Chief Regenweather and Andy McGovern.
But, we made the decision that they needed we made the decision that they needed to go. However, we gave them the opportunity to resign first, so we did not terminate them just immediately.
Neither of them resigned.
Correct.
Okay. And so then what happened next?
We kept open channels between, they proceeded after I had meetings with them and with the human resource director, and I had meetings with each one of them, in which we told them that we'd like to resign. At that point, we didn't, you know, get a answer right there in the spot. We anticipated that. Both of them sought counsel. We worked through counsel and made sure we followed it, and tried to work things out before we came to the agreement then to go ahead with termination.
What was the information that you relied upon to determine that discipline was necessary, that termination was necessary in this
The
case?
size of the settlement was one which we felt demanded a strong response.
And why was it then Mr. McGovern and Mr. Regenweather that you decided to terminate?
Mr. McGovern, because he was the closest involved with the billing issue in question, and then Mr. Regenweather as the department head of the department involved.
When you say closest involved, what do you mean?
Worked actually with the issue, talked to during our case, the Schulteis case, had worked with our attorneys, and we knew was the one primarily involved in the documentation and the billing process. I would call our documentation to billing process.
Okay, was that his responsibility to make
Yeah.
sure that? What other reasons, with regard to Mr. McGovern, did you have for terminating him?
Well, that was that, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, that it was gonna be done correctly going forward, and that, we got it on track. So that was the beginning of a complete changeover in the personnel who did it, and then our procedure as well.
What do you mean your procedure?
Well, we started to talk about that we needed to outsource the billing practice itself.
Okay, and why is that?
We wanted to avoid this kind of incident again. We looked carefully at firms and having them provide training to our staff to make sure our documentation was correct, and just to have more eyes looking at it with more of an expertise level brought in.
What did you feel, from your involvement in this litigation, what do you think happened here?
I think we had a case where the rules are not being understood correctly. I don't really assign motive or anything like that to it. It's just, the nature of it is the city ended up having to pay a large settlement because of it, and, we had to respond.
And why did you think this was the proper response?
Because, again, the size of the settlement was so large, we felt that it warranted a response like that.
How about with the, Mr. Regenweather, what were your reasons, what was your thought process in deciding to terminate him?
Well, mainly because he was the department head of the department involved. And we felt like, that in talking to Mr. Walker, that Mark wasn't very involved in the case and made a point of, telling us that it was Mr. McGovern's primary responsibility, but we found that to be unacceptable
Why was that?
because it was something major going on in his department.
Now, you decided to terminate Mr. Regenweather as fire chief, right, which is a non-civil service. But you then went further and determined that he would not be part of the fire department at all, that he'd be terminated completely from the city. Tell me why you did that.
We just thought it would create a difficult situation possibly with him. I thought it was kind of splitting hairs to try to separate the two.
What do you mean?
Well, I thought it would be difficult to have, with the emotions involved in those things going on, to create possibly a difficult workplace within the department.
In what way?
Just maintaining difficult, possibly interpersonal relationships with the new chief and those types of things. I was concerned about that.
Any other reasons that you had for determining termination?
No.
In what way did you feel that Mr. Regenweather failed to carry out his duties in the department?
I felt like once the Schulteis case came to light, that there should have been a stronger response at that point.
Such as?
Such as, dealing directly, making sure, having the work possibly audited, or those types of things. It was a tough situation at the time for me because a lot of what we were discussing, the case was not fully signed off. We weren't yet, I was still tied by confidentiality in terms of the closed sessions and things, so I couldn't get into a lot of that with him and a lot of other specifics that might lead into more info about the case.
Through this, did you become aware that Mr. Schulteis had complained about the way the billing practices were in the fire department, or the coding practices in the fire department since 2007?
I did find out, yes. I found that out later on as I got to know more about the case.
And did that play a role in your decision?
I think somewhat because of the timing of it.
What do you mean?
Well, just that there was a lot of time in between and not much had changed, and I was concerned that we were, at that point, nothing was moving fast enough in order to try to head this off.
What other reasons did you have to decide that Mr. Regenweather had committed misconduct?
That was the primary reason.
Anything else?
No.
With regard to Mr. McGovern, in what ways did you feel that he had neglected his duty or committed misconduct?
I felt that he had just gotten, that it wrong. we've been doing this process wrong for some time, and that it was leaving the door open for the city to have a fairly serious liability.
And why was it his responsibility to correct
Because he
that?
was the primary person, the overseer of EMS, and dealt with the billing and actually directly dealt with the finance department in terms of how they billed.
Did you feel his actions were reckless or intentionally indifferent, as stated in the lawsuit?
I felt that they were not adequate for the situation or how he handled it.
In what
So it was
way?
either ignorance or, I don't know the motive exactly, but ignorance of the system or something which led to this liability that the city is carrying or potentially open to.